Stone towers, iron gates, and walls so thick they laughed at catapults. Castles weren't just medieval mansions, they were survival machines built for war. Forget the Hollywood nonsense. No endless sword fights at the gate, no dramatic oil dumps every 5 minutes. The real tricks of defense were smarter, stranger, and far deadlier. Once you see how castles were actually defended, you'll never watch a movie siege the same way again. Hollywood loves to show knights dramatically clashing on open fields, but real battles started before attackers even reached the courtyard. The true fight was against stone and earth. Castles were designed as puzzles that exhausted enemies before a single sword was drawn. First came the moat. It wasn't always a water-filled ditch swarming with crocodiles like movies suggest. Often it was just a deep trench of mud and sharpened stakes. Sounds unimpressive, but try dragging siege towers through that sludge under a rain of arrows. Suddenly, it's a death trap. Then came the walls. These weren't flimsy backdrops. Many were so thick you could build entire rooms inside them. Rounded towers gave defenders wide angles of fire so attackers couldn't huddle in blind spots. And every wall wasn't just high, it was layered. Break through one? Congratulations, now you're trapped in a narrow killing ground between walls. And then the gatehouse, the ultimate choke point. Heavy portcullis doors dropped in seconds, trapping invaders like rats. Murder holes above allowed defenders to rain down arrows, stones, or worse. Think of it as a medieval funnel of doom. The brilliance wasn't brute strength, it was design. Every step an enemy took closer to the heart of a castle was meant to sap morale, wear down numbers and remind them, you don't break into a fortress, you bleed for every inch. Forget the dramatic one arrow drops a knight movie moment. Real castle defense with arrows was about volume, precision, and psychology. Archers didn't aim for the heart, they aimed for horses, hands, and faces. Take out the mounts, cripple the enemy, and force chaos in their ranks. From towers and walls, longbowmen had a terrifying advantage. Elevation meant distance. A rain of arrows wasn't just deadly, it broke morale. Imagine hearing nothing but the hiss of shafts and the screams of men falling beside you. That's not cinematic, it's psychological warfare. And then there were murder holes, a defensive trick that sounds like something out of horror. Hidden above gateways and corridors, these openings let defenders dump anything they had: rocks, hot sand, even quicklime. Boiling oil? Rare, too expensive. More often it was scalding water or tar, painful, blinding, and demoralizing. Defenders also got creative. Crossbowmen shot through narrow slits called arrow loops, impossible to hit back through. Stones were dropped from battlements, crushing anyone unlucky enough to be pressed against the wall. Even livestock carcasses were sometimes hurled to spread disease among attackers. Every strike from above wasn't just about killing, it was about forcing hesitation. When attackers stopped to shield themselves, they stalled. When they stalled, panic spread. A castle didn't have to kill everyone outside its walls. It just had to remind them that every step forward meant another brutal surprise. A castle wasn't just defended with stone, it was defended with time. Sieges were slow, grinding wars of patience. If attackers couldn't break through, they would try to starve defenders out. That meant survival inside the walls became as critical as the arrows raining down outside. Castles were built with deep wells carved into solid rock. Cutting water supplies was a classic siege tactic, but a hidden, protected, well-kept defenders alive for months. Food was stockpiled: salted meat, hard bread, dried beans. Unappetizing, yes, but survival wasn't about taste. Sometimes even fish ponds or gardens were built inside the walls for renewable food sources. And when supplies dwindled, defenders turned to trickery. If attackers thought the castle was starving, morale inside would collapse. So defenders staged feasts on the battlements, roasting meat in plain sight. Imagine the rage outside, starving soldiers watching the enemy celebrate. It was a mind game, and it worked. Psychological warfare didn't stop there. Corpses of enemy prisoners were sometimes catapulted back over the walls to spread disease and terror. In return, defenders hurled insults, drums, horns, anything to remind the enemy they weren't breaking in anytime soon. The point wasn't just to hold out, it was to break the will of the attackers. Because in siege warfare, whoever ran out of patience first lost. And castles were built to make sure it wasn't their defenders. Movies love to show gleaming knights saving the day, but castles weren't defended by a handful of armoured heroes. Defence was a community effort. Every person inside those walls, from seasoned soldiers to blacksmiths and cooks, had a role to play. Knights did matter, they were shock troops, the elite. But in a siege, their job wasn't gallant dueling. It was plugging breaches, leading sorties, and keeping morale alive. Archers were the real backbone. From behind arrow slits, they controlled the battlefield, cutting down siege crews, pinning enemies in place, and forcing attackers to crawl forward under shields. But the unsung defenders were ordinary townsfolk. Women carried stones to the battlements. Children fetched water for boiling or for dousing fires when flaming projectiles hit. Blacksmiths repaired weapons day and night. Even priests had roles, blessing defenders, ringing bells, and keeping spirits from breaking. And there were moments of desperate heroism. When walls were breached, defenders would rush in with spears, pikes, even farm tools. Close combat in narrow corridors favoured the home team. Attackers couldn't spread out, they were forced into choke points where every defender counted double. A castle was never just stone and steel, it was people. People working together with one brutal purpose: hold the line no matter what. Because for them, losing the castle didn't mean retreat, it meant massacre, slavery, or worse. And that gave every defender, knight, or commoner the resolve to fight like their lives depended on it, because they did. Pop culture has turned castles into backdrops for heroic duels, flaming arrows lighting up the night, and armies storming walls in minutes. The truth? None of that reflects how castles actually worked. Real sieges weren't days of non-stop combat, they were months, sometimes years of attrition, patience, and mind games. Hollywood shows dramatic last stands. In reality, defenders avoided open field battles at all costs. The entire design of a castle was to prevent cinematic heroics. Attackers weren't cut down in neat rows. They died slowly from exhaustion, disease, and frustration. Defenders didn't waste precious oil on every enemy. They rationed everything. And victories weren't celebrated with cheering crowds, but with collapsing from hunger and relief. The lesson castles taught was simple, but brutal. War is about logistics and endurance, not glory. A well-built fortress could turn 1,000 men into a nightmare for an army of 10,000. It showed that terrain, engineering, and discipline could outweigh raw numbers or flashy charges. That's why Hollywood misses the point. The true drama of a siege wasn't in flashy sword fights, it was in the silent standoff, the waiting, the slow grind where fear gnawed at both sides. Castles weren't monuments to medieval romance, they were machines of survival. Reminders that in war, the side that keeps breathing longest usually wins. And once you see that truth, the movie version of castle warfare feels like a fairy tale, not history. Castles weren't dreamlike fortresses or fairy tale homes. They were war machines designed to exhaust, terrify, and crush anyone foolish enough to test them. Behind every stone wall and iron gate was centuries of trial, error, and brutal experience. Forget the Hollywood fantasy. Real medieval defense was calculated, merciless, and built on human endurance. When armies came, castles didn't just defend land, they defended survival itself. And in that fight, there was no room for romance, only survival. A castle wasn't a symbol of glory, it was a promise that if you came for it, you'd pay in blood.